Welcome to freedivorce.com.
This is Christina.
And this is Ed. Today we're going to talk about the preliminary declaration of disclosure documents. At this point, we're assuming you filled out your divorce petition, summons, and if you have minor children, your UCC JEA declaration. So the next step in the divorce process is to complete your preliminary declaration of disclosure documents. Completion of these documents is mandatory. Christina, would you please explain what is a preliminary declaration of disclosure?
A preliminary declaration of disclosure documents consists of a collection of 4 court forms. The forms are FL 140, known as Declaration of Disclosure, FL 141, known as Declaration Regarding Service, FL 142, known as Schedule of Assets and Debts, and FL 150, known as Income and Expense Declaration.
And what is the purpose of the preliminary declaration of disclosure documents?
The purpose of these 4 forms is to make certain everyone lays their cards on the table before entering into any settlement agreement. The forms are designed to force both parties to disclose information about assets, debts, and income. And so the courts require both parties to fill these out in order to ensure that nobody is cheated when it comes to reaching a settlement agreement.
Well, how do the forms force parties to disclose information about, say, assets and debts?
Well, one of the key disclosure forms is called the Schedule of Assets and Debts. That's FL 142. And on that form, you will list all of your assets, indicating the amount each asset is worth and whether the assets are community property or separate property. You also have to list all of your debts, showing how much is owed, credit cards, student loans, etc. The idea is this: if you're going to ask your spouse to sign a settlement agreement dividing all of that property and all of those debts, they need to know what exists, what assets exist and what those are worth, and what debts exist and how much is owed.
And how do the disclosure forms force parties to disclose information about their income?
Well, that's with the Income and Expense Declaration, which is FL 150. Basically, this form lists all of your income. It lists a lot of other information, but the most important information is the amount of your income. If you're going to ask your spouse to enter into any agreement that contains provisions for child support or for spousal support, they're entitled to know how much money you earn before they sign that agreement.
What do you do with your disclosure forms after you filled them out?
Okay, after you fill out your preliminary declaration of disclosure documents, you're required to give copies to your spouse. And your spouse also has to fill out the same forms and give them to you, give copies to you. The court will generally not approve a divorce judgment until both parties have completed their disclosure documents and have exchanged copies.
And do you fill out the disclosure forms once, or do you have to do it more than once?
Well, you're supposed to fill out the disclosure forms twice. Once during the initial stages of the divorce, and then again at the end of the divorce. And when you fill out your disclosure documents at the beginning of the divorce, that's called preliminary declaration of disclosure. The second time you fill them out, they're supposed to be called final declaration of disclosure. Contested divorces can take months and sometimes years to complete, because people go to court and fight with lawyers, etc. So during that time, the value of the assets you've listed, the amount of your income, all of those things can change. That is why the court wants the parties to fill out the preliminary declaration of disclosure at the beginning and the final declaration of disclosure at the end, so everybody has current information.
Well, can parties waive filling out and exchanging these disclosure documents?
You absolutely must fill out your preliminary declaration of disclosure. Filling it out is mandatory. However, you and your spouse can waive filling out the final declaration of disclosure. If the divorce is uncontested, the divorce is not going to take a long time to complete. You can prepare all the necessary divorce paperwork in a matter of days or weeks. The information on these forms about your assets and income won't change much from the time you do your preliminary declaration of disclosure at the beginning of the divorce until the time you sign the settlement papers at the end. So most people are going to fill out only their preliminary declaration of disclosure documents and then sign a stipulation waiving the exchange of their final declarations of disclosure.
When do you have to fill out your preliminary declaration of disclosure forms? When are they due?
Your preliminary declaration of disclosure documents should be completed and served on your spouse within 60 days of the date you filed your divorce petition with the court. Although you have 60 days, it's generally best to complete your disclosure documents as soon as you can.
Okay, so let's briefly go over the 4 forms that make up the preliminary declaration of disclosure. Let's start with the declaration of disclosure cover sheet, which is the FL-140. Tell me a little bit more about that.
That's exactly what it is. It is like a cover sheet. You check some boxes, you answer a few questions, and you have to attach copies of your state and federal income tax returns for the past 2 years.
Okay, and then what about the schedule of assets and debts, the FL-142? Tell me a little bit more about that form.
This is a 4-page form on which you will list all assets and all debts. You have to indicate the value of each asset and how much is owed on each debt. You also indicate whether the asset or debt is community property or separate property. Here's what makes this form take a while to complete. Every entry you make on that form for an asset like a house, car, bank account, or for a debt like a credit card or a student loan must be supported by a piece of paper. So you have to dig out statements to attach to it.
And would you briefly describe the income and expense declaration, which is the FL-150?
This is also a 4-page form. On page 1, you will provide information about your employment, education, and tax filings. On page 2, you will provide information about your income. On page 3, you will list information about your expenses. On page 4, you will provide information about various other matters. You'll also attach 2 months' worth of paycheck stubs to this form, or a Schedule C and a profit and loss statement if you're self-employed.
All right, and then the final form, the declaration regarding service, the FL-141. What's that form?
Well, after you have completed the 3 forms I just discussed, FL-140, 142, and 150, you need to make 1 copy of each of the completed forms and give the copies to your spouse. After you have given your spouse the copies, you can complete the final form that makes up the preliminary declaration of disclosure. And that final form is the Declaration Regarding Service, or FL-141. This is a 1-page form which confirms to the court that you completed your disclosure forms and gave a copy to your spouse.
Are these forms difficult to fill out?
Filling out the forms can be confusing. We offer as an option for the nominal charge of $20 a Declaration of Disclosure Video Guides package. If you elect to purchase this package, you get access to 4 instructional videos. 1 video shows you how to fill out FL-140 and includes a generic attachment you can use to answer questions 4, 5, and 6 on that form. 1 video shows you how to fill out the schedule of assets and debts. Another video shows you how to fill out the income and expense declaration. And the final video shows you how to fill out the declaration regarding service. The videos go through each form with step-by-step instructions and include valuable tips and information on how to fill out each form to your advantage. The guides include a wealth of information about the forms and the law. You get all 4 video guides for a total of $20. If you want to purchase this package of video guides, go to the video guide database and click the Declaration of Disclosure package.
Do I have to buy the Declaration of Disclosure video package in order to get access to the 4 disclosure forms?
No. All 4 of the Declaration of Disclosure forms are absolutely free in our court forms database. You can go to our database, pull up each form, fill out the forms, and print them. We make the Declaration of Disclosure video package available at a nominal cost to simplify and clarify the process of filling out these forms. The $20 helps us to offset the cost of maintaining and improving the freedivorce.com website.
Since both parties are required to fill out the Declaration of Disclosure forms, if I'm going through a divorce, after I fill out my disclosure forms, can I tell my spouse to use this website to access the disclosure forms so they can fill out their own forms?
Absolutely. Tell them to watch this video before they fill out their forms.
Can I get a divorce judgment without filling out my preliminary Declaration of Disclosure forms?
Both you and your spouse must fill out preliminary declarations of disclosure documents. The court wants to know that each party has provided the other with a full disclosure of all the assets, debts, and income before the court will approve any settlement or issue a judgment. The only exception to this rule is going to be a true default case. In a true default case, one of the spouses is not cooperating. Your spouse is never going to engage in the divorce process, is going to ignore the entire court proceeding, so then your spouse obviously is not going to be filling out their own preliminary declaration of disclosure. So in a true default case, only the petitioner fills out a preliminary declaration of disclosure.
Do I file my declaration of disclosure documents with the court after I've filled them out?
FL 140, which is the cover sheet, your FL 142, which is the schedule of assets and debts, are not filed with the court. The FL 150, which is the income and expense declaration, and the FL 141, which is the declaration regarding service, are filed with the court.
This has been a presentation by freedivorce.com.